Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for tuning in to I Hate Rock Music. And today I want to talk about a band that seems to remain relatively obscure, even though they've continued to be around all the way up until recently. Their last album was in 2023, albeit with different members than they started out with. And that's the group MX80 Sound. And I came across them just because their first single came out, Big Hits from the Hoosiers, and I was buying a lot of independent singles at the time, and I had no idea that there could be a band like this. I think it came out. It came out in 1976, so it was the very beginning of the punk movement. It looked really interesting, and I bought it, and I was completely blown away. Like a punk band that's so deranged with some jazz influences, and just like unlike any other band I've ever heard. One of my favorite tracks is a song called "Train to Loveland." And so the basic history of the band, they came out of Bloomington, Indiana in 1974, and Bruce Anderson, the guitar player, and David Sophia were in a kind of a hippie band called Screaming Gypsy Bandits. And then they eventually added Rich Stim from a band called China Boise. And so they combined, and they had a mutual interest in Beefheart and the Hampton Grease Band. Of course, my viewers know I love that band. So in 1975, they had two drummers, Kevin Tier and Jeff Armour, and the complete lineup of the band was Dave Mahoney, Jeff Armour, Bruce Anderson, Kevin Tier, and Rich Stim. And Rich Stim really adds the essential ingredient to this band. He's got a really droll, dry, almost talking vocal quality to him that just adds a great aspect on top of this incredible din, this chaotic din that MX80 Sound created. And so on the strength of that single being reviewed in the UK, somehow they got signed to Island Records and put out their first album, Heart Attack, on 1977. Which they recorded themselves. And of course, I immediately snagged it, and it's one of my favorite records of the punk era. And they're one of those damaged Midwest bands, and there's a lot of people out there. You think the Dead Boys and Pere Ubu are the last word in damaged Midwest rock. You really have to hear Heart Attack by MX80 Sound. It's got sort of a loose feel with kind of almost jazz fusion guitar runs. It's been described as either the best metallic art punk out there or the best arty metallic rock out there. And it does have some aspects with metal, but once again, the rhythms are so interesting and bizarre. The guitar work is so stunning, and then Rich Stim's droll vocals over the top. There really is nothing quite like it. And so they ended up moving to San Francisco. They kind of played out as much as they could back there in Indiana. Fortunately, we have a live album called Live at the Library, representing what they sounded like when they were back in Indiana. And there's a few live tapes around, and there's also an expanded version of Heart Attack now that has all kinds of bonus tracks, because apparently Dave Anderson had a gigantic shit ton of rehearsal tapes. And it's really amazing how much material they generated. I guess we only scraped the tip of the iceberg as far as what's out there. But Dave Anderson has passed away now a couple years ago, and that material probably languished in the vaults. But anyway, 1978 they moved to San Francisco, and they hooked up with the Residence record label, Ralph Records. It's just hard to imagine any other label that would pick up MX80 Sound. They're so strange, even though their music is completely incongruent with what the Residents were doing. But in 1978, they released Out of the Tunnel, and then in 1979, they released Crowd Control. Well, actually, that one came out in 1981. So 1980 and 81, and they were down to a quartet at this point, one drummer. And just ferocious stuff. A little more tidy, a little more focused than the stuff that was on Heart Attack, but definitely unlike any other band you've had and have heard before. And definitely on the heavy side. They fit in with the punk scene, but they were definitely musicianship was definitely advanced compared to most punk bands, and they weren't of the punk scene, but they fit into it. And they released a couple of really great singles around there at that point too on Ralph Records, Someday You'll Be King, and then a non-LP O-Type 1 and 2, and then they showed up on a lot of different samplers as well. And they continue to exist for years. There's a big, huge gap between 1981 and about 1987. But 1987, they released a cassette called Existential Lover. 1990, they released a collection of really bizarre soundtrack songs called Das Love Boat. And 1995, they released a live album called I've Seen Enough. And all along that time too, they were releasing singles, and sometimes they're non-LP singles or versions that showed up later, completely differently. 1991, they released a single called 15 Laughs that's just wonderful, and the album version's a lot different. And in 1992, they released a single called Have Another Drink, which is excellent as well. And then in 2002, as I mentioned, they released the live at the library of them live in 1977 in Indiana, and it captures their full chaos live. If I thought the studio album Heart Attack was chaotic, their live show was even more insane. And then they kind of keyed their sound down a little bit. They came out with a single in 2002 called So Clear, and then an album in 2005 called We're an American Band. And yes, indeed, they do a cover of the Grand Funk's We're an American Band, but it's completely toned down, slowed down with Rich Stim's spoken droll vocals over the top, and definitely a more sober version of the band, but the quirkiness is totally intact. And even though it doesn't have the staggering guitar attack of their earlier work, it's just so individual and so unique. It's still worthy of the MX80 sound label name. I should add also that a lot of these records around this period, they go by the name MX80 because for legal reasons they were prohibited from using the name MX80 sound for a while, although they regained it later. And then in 2015 they did an album called So Funny, and then another live record in 2021 called Howler House. And then in 2023, their final album produced by Steve Albini with a return of more of Dave Anderson's loud guitar work called Better Than Life. And then they also put out a single when Tully Flew the Coop. And it's great that they wrapped up their career with an album that had more kinship to their earlier sound. And fortunately, we've got a bunch of material of them out there. Not only do we have all these albums, but there's the clip of them actually playing on TV in Indiana, and I'll post that down below. So it's great that we have video of the original band in '77, and then there's a live album from 1992, and then there's even a video called Why Are We Here from 1981. And so there's a huge amount of material out there. If you like them, dive into them. If you don't like one record, check out the next. But of course, with Dave Anderson passing away now, MX80 sound per se is done. Rich Stim has a YouTube channel, and there's a lot of oddball Rich Stim solo work and a lot of MX80 sound oddities on there that aren't on any records. So if you really get into this and you get hardcore, there's a lot for you to check out. But to go back to my original point, oh, and I actually got to see them live once. They played the Golden Crown here in Seattle, about 1982. It was amazing. They were just so powerful live, and it was great to see Dave Anderson really tearing it up. And Rich Stim had quite a presence. He was like a crooner in a lounge. But I'm really glad I got to see the band live at least once. But as I pointed out, the mother lode for me, the two Ralph albums from '80 and '81 are incredible. But the real mother lode is expanded version of their 1976 album, Big Hits from the Hoosiers. Their 1977 album, Heart Attack, that includes their 1976 EP, Big Hits from the Hoosiers. Between that EP and the Heart Attack album, you really couldn't get any better. Twisted, angular, metallic, spastic, damaged Midwest rock that makes Perubu sound like a bunch of pussies. So there you have it, MX80 Sound. If you haven't heard them, I've got a bunch of links below. Check them out. Uh, as I say about so many of the bands that I talk about, one of my favorite bands of all time. And I don't necessarily gravitate towards obscure bands. I just like original visions. I like to hear stuff I've never heard before. I like to hear bands take risks, and I like to hear really weird shit. These people really have visions. It's great that they get recorded. Bands like this could have easily slipped through the cracks and never been heard by anyone. Fortunately, we have a massive amount of material by them, and MX80 Sound. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.